gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, this game we all love, Elden Ring, is, well, a little bit rough around the edges. Something can both be a masterpiece of game design and have its issues, but sometimes those issues can translate into fun, rather than purely into pain and misery. Today is one of those days, as this unique, unintended interaction actually makes it more enjoyable to use an Ash of War in the game that otherwise sees extremely little use. Not because it is bad necessarily, but because it simply isn't quite as good as the vast majority of other options. The Ash of War in question here is called Golden Land, a move taken directly off of the Erdtree avatars, where you stick your weapon into the ground, followed up by a big holy blast of energy that then reforms into a number of tracking holy projectiles. The limit of this is, of course, that it is holy damage. A number of major bosses are heavily resistant to holy damage, but what if you could use this holy damage in another way? What if those same high-range tracking projectiles could also apply bleed? Well, they can, through a little interaction where this Ash of War is affected by weapon buffs. All you have to do is apply it to a weapon that can be buffed, keep it on an affinity that can be buffed, and then you have a very interesting way to apply statuses. The big thing about it is that the damage it does itself is pretty high, and it unfortunately does not carry over the damage or scaling of any of the statuses that you put on it, only the base effect. For example, Frozen Armament will put cold buildup on your weapon, but the amount that it adds is quite small, and against even an enemy with a pretty big health bar like an avatar, you can chunk through the entire thing without ever applying frost. Contrary to this, however, is a special little status called bloodflame. You can get this as an incantation to put it on your right hand weapon, and when you do that and then use this Ash of War, every one of the projectiles reapplies the bloodflame debuff, which gives a good chunk of bleed buildup over a couple of seconds. While this effect doesn't stack with itself, it means every time that you hit the Ash of War, one proper stack of bloodflame will apply to your enemy, eventually leading up to a bleed or two over the course of a fight. This lets you take advantage of standard bleed build boosts, and the damage bonus that you get from those actually affects the holy damage of the Ash of War as well, which is especially nice because it doesn't gain the fire effect at all. While Bloodflame Blade is supposed to give you both the status buildup and also an amount of fire damage based off of your incantation scaling, it doesn't raise the damage of the Ash of War here even slightly to have this effect on your weapon. The only thing that changes is that it applies ticks of the status itself. As a result, this isn't too destructive in any way to the game's balancing. It isn't more powerful than the intentionally powerful things. All it does is put this Ash of War back on a semi-even playing field, buffing it back into usability.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
In PvP, the bleed part doesn't really take effect at all, but the Ash of War still has its uses. Anyone who has seen this Ash before knows that they can just dodge it by running in a straight line perpendicular to you once the projectiles form, but people often underestimate the melee ranged portions of this skill. And once you have someone running between the projectiles, you can quite easily just start chasing them down and time your attacks between their rolls to punish them for dodging the tinier projectiles. So, now we have made a whole build around this, how can it truly function in a way that takes advantage of what it has? Well, the first thing is that it can only be applied to the biggest weapons in the game, so in this case we've chosen to go with the Greatsword, as it has a particularly good AR with great reach as well. This could realistically be any colossal weapon, but this specific one is quite good and serves excellently as our secondary damage source in this build, given that it is, of course, affected by the entirety of the Bloodflame Blade buff as well, gaining a significant amount of fire damage on your weapon swings on top of the base damage that they have in the first place. Even with using the literal minimum strength to use the weapon as we do on this build, it hits for absolutely whopping numbers, allowing us to fuel this build with both a great Ash of War and a great base weapon to have underneath it. The build isn't broken powerful by any means, but it has a lot of variety and options to make things work in different situations. Even things that are particularly holy resistant can be taken down with the sword, as it should always be. The talismans used to make it happen then are the Shard of Alexander, boosting your weapon skill damage by 15%, which is great for this concept, and you can get that for yourself from the Alexander questline, which has 3 major steps. First, starting in the desert after you fight General Radahn, the second one in the magma pools just to the west of the Seedwater Terminus, Site of Grace, and the final one near the Dragon Temple Lift, Site of Grace in the crumbling Farum Azula region. The Sacred Scorpion Charm Talisman, which raises your holy damage by 12.5% at the expense of reducing your damage negation, which of course boosts our Ash of War damage outright even more, and you can grab this one from the NPC invasion that happens at the Smoldering Church church in Caelid. It's also worth mentioning that you probably should replace this one if you're using it in PvP, as this one really ups the damage negation reduction in PvP and really downs the damage buff, so it's not worth it anymore. Then after that, there is the Bloodlord's Exaltation Talisman. Of course, as we use the Ash of War and Bloodflame combo to cause bleeds, we may as well take advantage of this beautiful 20% buff for 20 seconds after causing a bleed to happen. As well as this, you can get the White Mask Helmet on for another 10% buff for the same duration and same situation. The talisman comes from the boss of the Lanedell Catacombs dungeon, accessed from the sewers, and the helmet is dropped by an NPC invader that happens in the Lake of Blood in Mogwyn Palace, but only before you have killed Mohg himself. Finally, I recommend the Carrion Filigreed crest, as we are spamming the Ash of War from range the majority of the time that we use this weapon. It is worth noting that the Ash of War has a follow-up weapon swing if you press R2 as well, but against anything that isn't properly resistant to holy damage, it's just more effective to spam the Ash of War button and do the first part on repeat from quite far away. This talisman lets you do that at a 25% lower cost. And if you want it for yourself, all you have to do is purchase it from War Counselor EG after you have agreed to team up with Ranni the Witch. For your Wondrous Flask of Physic, the main one that you want to use is the Holy Shrouding Cracked tier, to boost your holy damage by 20% for the duration. And then the second slot is somewhat free choice for whatever you feel matches the situation. To get the Holy Boosting tier, you need to defeat the boss at the Minor Erdtree on the eastern side of Liurnia. Of course, for this, you also need a seal to cast your incantations, and the best one for an 80 faith build is always the Erdtree seal. And the incantations that you want to cast with it are obviously the one that we've been talking about loads in Bloodflame Blade, which gives your weapon the Bloodflame status, as well as adding a load of fire damage to the weapon itself. And this one you can get by defeating the Scarab running around just northwest of the Rose Church in Liurnia. Then we have the classic 2 buffs that pretty much any build will run if it has the stats, being Golden Vow, which raises all damage by 15%, and damage reduction by 10% for 80 seconds after casting, and then Flame Grant Me Strength, now, because Blood Flame doesn't actually apply the fire damage to your Ash of War, only the status portion, your Ash of War doesn't benefit from Flame Grant Me Strength in the slightest. However, it is a major part of what makes your weapon hits as strong as they are, especially with the weapon buff on it. So, if you know you won't be swinging the weapon in an encounter, then don't worry about applying this buff. But if you want to swing that thing, then you should fling this buff onto your body, because it really helps out a lot. To get Golden Vow, simply head to the Corpse Tent Shack on the east side of Mount Gelmir. If you want to have Flame Grant Me Strength, go to the backside of Fort Gale on the western edge of Caelid, and then find it nestled between a couple of flame wagons.
Stop, jump, and roll! Stop, jump, and roll!
With that, then, we have every piece of equipment required to make this build the way that I've shown it to you. So what are the stats that you want to make it happen? Well, first and foremost, you want a minimum of 40 vigor, but 60 is always the goal if you're able to reach it. Strength you want at 21, as that is the minimum to wield this greatsword within 2 hands. Faith up to 80 is your main scaling stat for the Ash of War, and also for the fire damage that will be applied to your sword. And then Arcane at 10, so you can use Bloodflame Blade as an incantation to buff you in the first place. Past this, you can just play around with a bit of intelligence to let you mess with frozen armament, or just put the rest of your points in endurance and mind to fuel the repeated casting of this Ash of War. Past this, the only thing left to do is kill to your heart's content, and so I wish you all the best in your journey to fill this golden land with blood and fire, I guess. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this interaction and maybe even felt inspired to turn this into a build that you'll use yourself. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.